everyone. Today is July 7th, 2022, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan in the spring of 2020. Every week, we bring you another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and anybody who negotiates in any part of their life. There's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank if they like what they see. We've been doing this now for quite some time, and our audiences have been so generous in donating in honor of our great speakers. One of my favorite parts of the webinar each week is when we announce the running total of just how much our audiences have contributed. Jean, would you please do the honors?
Oh, my pleasure. Well, we're knocking on the door of 300,000. It will be here soon. $292,455.86 in donations, of which we know. You know it's more than that, and that's well more than 3 million meals. Thank you all so much.
That is amazing. Indeed, thank you all. So let's make Stewart Levine the answer to what will undoubtedly be a trivia question for the ages. Who was the speaker who put the Will Work for Food project above $300,000? Let's give Stewart Levine that great honor, everybody. Stewart will be telling us in just a minute about the food bank to which he would like people to contribute if they're in a position to do so. But first, let me introduce my old friend, Stewart Levine. He reminds me that we met in the early 1990s at an American Bar Association conference. He looks the same. And Stewart is the founder of ResolutionWorks. Stewart describes himself as a resolutionary. So if that's a combination of resolution and visionary, that is indeed Stewart Levine. He's a counselor, mediator, facilitator, trainer, author. He's widely recognized for creating agreement and empowerment in the most challenging circumstances. He improves productivity while saving the enormous cost of conflict. His innovative work with agreements for results and his resolutionary conversational models are unique. As a practicing lawyer, he realized that fighting was a very ineffective way to resolve problems. As a marketing executive for AT&T, he saw that the reason collaborations fall apart is that people do not spend time at the beginning of new working relationships to create clarity about what they want to accomplish together and how they will get there. This is just as true for employment relationships, teams, joint ventures, and all members of any virtual team. His conversational models create agreements for results and a quick return to productivity when working relationships break down. And Stewart is here to talk to us today about collaboration, what it is, what it isn't, how to get it. Stewart, we're so glad you're here. Please tell us about the food bank to which you'd like people to direct contributions. And then we'd love to hear your presentation about collaboration. My friend, the floor is yours.
Great, Jeff. Thank you so much for that lovely and generous introduction. Natalie, thank you very much for inviting me. It really is a pleasure to be here today. The Alameda Food Bank. Alameda, California is where I live, where I've been for the last 30 some odd years, and there's a wonderful food bank in Alameda that does a great job of feeding a lot of people. So please, that's the place to donate to today. So I'm going to start us off today with a poem. All right, that's the one thing that Jeff didn't mention in my introduction. I'm kind of an accidental poet in that my first poem kind of rolled off of out of my pen a little over 20 years ago, and I'm about to publish a wonderful anthology of poetry, 365 poems, one poem for every day of the year with some reflective questions. All right, so let me start off with this poem, and it's called Agreements. Hopefully it'll kind of get you in the mood to think about agreements. And here it is. Agreements are all over. Without them, you're a rover. Implicit framing collaboration, explicit results beyond expectation. Shared visions set a clear plan, build trust for woman and man. Alignment and agreements in place, easier to reach, states of grace. Accomplish little alone, harnessed together is stronger than stone. Hook talents to a team with a mission, results flow from express joint vision. Partners with a deep covenant light you up with energy abundant. Solid ground with your team, with loved ones, express a dream. Know who you are, what you're about, align with others, stand back, shout, be amazed with great delight. Teammates make your life bright. Results beyond what you had in mind, life force wells up without any bind. Satisfaction fills your heart. Joining with others, life becomes art. So what I'm going to share with you today are a few conversational models and some principles for creating joint vision and creating, powerful collaborations. Some of what I say may be new, and most of what I say may be things that you're familiar with, but articulated in kind of a different way. As I speak and share some of these principles, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end, please think about, are you using these principles in your work, in your life? What's new? What's the same? How might I apply this in a more intentional, deliberate way? And what I also want to say is, everybody on this call today, the world needs more of us. Each one of you, no doubt, is a bit of an island of sanity in the world in which there is an awful lot of chaos. So I want to just thank and acknowledge you for all of the work you do. So it's time to share some slides and for me to speak a little because time is short. Okay, so we're going to talk about powerful collaborations, all right? And some of the resources behind what I'm going to talk about are found in these three books. Probably the most well-known is Getting to Resolution, Turning Conflict into Collaboration. The Book of Agreement was a follow-up book, but it was also the book I wanted to write first. But my editor and publisher really quite didn't get it because I wanted to write that first because I thought that this was the innovation. There was a lot out there about conflict, but there wasn't that much about agreements. And over time is that you can prevent an awful lot of conflict if you have good, solid agreements in place. But most people don't spend the time on the front end to really get clear about what it is they're doing together. And the third book is a book called Collaboration 2.0, which I co-authored in the Silicon Valley movement towards having people work from home. And that was in the about 2007 or 8 was when it was published. I had no idea it was going to be so valuable as a tool as we all started to work from home during the pandemic. So that's just a little bit of background. It's a wonderful mantra that I think is really important. Collaborate or die. It's so true. Alone, we cannot do much, but with others, we can accomplish an awful lot. An example would be the collaboration that makes this program work that raised $300,000, not quite, but by the end of this program, we'll hit that mark. All right. So when there is conflict, when there is disagreement, when things break down, when people are sitting behind their computer screens with smoke coming out of their ears in their workplace, there's a cost of conflict. There's a direct cost. Sorry to talk about putting ourselves out of work, but there is a direct cost, the cost of hiring folks like us to help people resolve conflict. There's a productivity cost, reduced capacity, time lost, and the opportunity cost. There's a continuity cost when you lose someone who's part of a a working group or a partner or a marriage, and there's an emotional cost and the stress-related disease that goes with that. So there is a huge cost of conflict. And the way I like to think about this is that the conflict happened yesterday. And as long as we continue into the future, we're paying that cost on a daily basis. And that's why moving quickly into resolving conflict is so important. Conflict is natural, neither positive nor negative. It's an interference pattern of energies. Nature uses conflict as a motivator for change, creating beautiful beaches, canyons, mountains, pearls. It's not whether you have conflict, it's what you do with it. And so what I like to think is that we can all use the conflicts in our own life and in our work to create more powerful collaborations, to learn about relationships and to deepen those relationships. Winning, losing are goals for games, not for conflict. This is kind of a key piece. And why? Because many times the people that come to us think about their situation as a win or a lose. It's part of our culture. We live in kind of a sports culture. Everybody thinks about who's going to win and who's going to lose. And in truth, those are nice goals for games, but not in situations of conflict. It's about learning and growing and not about who is right. And the whole notion of conflict begins within. A dear friend of mine, Elizabeth Bader, has written extensively about this, about how people get ego identified with the situations of conflict that they are in, and important both for parties and for lawyers, and how important it is to kind of step beyond that and look at practical ways of resolving conflict. Kudos to my friend Tom Crum, who did a beautiful series about resolving conflict, stemming out of his work as an Aikido master. All right. Conflict and collaboration, two sides of the same coin. When I first started doing this work and first started speaking about it and first starting exploring it, pardon me, I used to lead with conflict. And now I lead with collaboration because I think that that's such an important value. The reason we need to get good at resolving conflict is because collaboration is the return to productivity and a pathway to much higher performance. But they're two sides of the same coin. They're kind of hand in glove. No matter how good your collaboration is, at some point in time, there'll be some element of breakdown. And it's important to kind of to remember that, to normalize that, to think about that as just an ordinary occurrence. Why? So that we don't get triggered, plugged in, upset when situations of conflict arise. So let me talk about some of the things that collaboration requires / resolution requires as kind of critical pieces of this puzzle. All right. So what does collaboration require of us? What does it ask for people who want to work well together? Well, it asks us to be, and I'm about to share a mouthful, an emotionally intelligent, conscious communicator that values collaboration, that engages in resolutionary thinking, that creates agreements for results and chooses to change their behavior going forward, learning what it was that created the conflict, what it was that they did or didn't do. It's interesting. One of the things that I've learned in my own life is that the first thing I ask myself when something goes wrong is, what did I do or not do? Not point the finger at another, but what did I do or not do? I wanted to say something about this word resolutionary, all right? Jeff used that in his introduction. What I'm most proud of is the fact that I didn't spend a small fortune on a branding expert to come up with that title. It's what a client called me after I was coaching him through a difficult conflict resolution series. He pointed at me and he said, You are a resolutionary, Stuart. You're a resolutionary. That's what you are. And I had that on my business card since 1991. It's interesting, in the late 90s, when the first iPad came out, if you open the Apple website, the word resolutionary appeared right there. And so some friends of mine were encouraging me to go after Apple because they stole my intellectual property. But I decided it was not such a good idea, and I just let that one be. All right. So often we get into trouble when we react, and we can't take back these words. I'll never forget. I was in my late 20s, and my law partner and mentor, who was about 65 at the time, who I thought was very old, took me aside one day, and I don't anymore, put his arm around me and said, "Stuart, remember this, you cannot unpunch someone." And that has just stuck in my mind for the longest period of time because it's such an important mantra. And we've all been there when we think about all of a sudden we reacted and out came the words and we wish we could take them back, but you can't. So it's an important thing to be mindful of. Emotional intelligence is something that I mentioned. It's actually one of the curriculums that I teach for the American Management Association. But just to kind of highlight these, self-knowledge, knowing a bit about who you are, self-awareness, being aware of what's going on inside of you at any moment in time. Self-regulation is our capacity to control and monitor our behavior. Self-motivation, what's important to you? Why? I like to think of this as the strategic element of emotional intelligence. Why is it important? Because it will kind of provide a frame and a guide for the relationships that we're in, what's important and what's not important to us. Empathy, one of my favorite quotes that I use as part of my email signature, when I first saw it, I said, that's an expression of empathy. It's a couplet from the poet Longfellow. If you knew the secret history of those you would like to punish, you would find a sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all your hostility. Empathy, beautiful articulation, and good social skills, the ability to engage with others, the ability to form collaborations, the ability to move through conflicts in a productive way. Okay, but what's the most powerful tool? And it's a critical tool, listening. All right, our ability to be present for others. The interesting thing about listening is it's one of the few things in this world that you can choose to do unilaterally. You don't need anybody's help or cooperation. You just choose to be in service of another. And I think that's one of the critical skills for mediators. All right, to be present in a way without your own agenda and without your own concerns, but to really be there for others and to be in service to them. Now, resolutionary thinking, all right? The mindset that people need to bring for effective collaborations, resolutionary thinking. And these include thinking in terms of abundance, okay? That there's enough for them and enough for me in any situation of conflict. That we want to move through any conflict very, very efficiently and creatively. If we each use our creative capacity, if everyone uses their creative capacity, we'll find ways in which everybody gets what they need. As part of a program I was teaching a number of years ago, I was selling some audio tapes. One of the audio tapes was a program called The Secrets of Power Negotiation. And I blanched when I first heard that term, and I didn't quite know exactly what it meant. I thought it was going to be a lot of tricks and tools. But the guy who was teaching it was the name of Roger Dawson from Great Britain, who said the most powerful form of negotiation is to find out what they want and figure out how to give it to them and get them thinking in the same mindset. All right, so using our creativity. Does your behavior foster resolution? Are you really open and filled with disclosure? Do you think long-term, not just short-term? Do you account for feelings, not just rationality, but the people's feelings in the situation? And I have found over time that when feelings are not part of a process of drilling down into dealing with whatever conflict it is, that the solutions often come back to bite you. Full disclosure, thinking about the process of resolving conflict as a learning experience, teaching and learning, teaching and learning, teaching and learning, and that every individual in a situation of conflict or collaboration must take responsibility for their behavior, because conflict and disagreement lives inside us as an emotion, as a presence. Nobody else can resolve it for you. It's something that you have to do yourself. All right. I'm glad you got the cat there, Natalie. It's so nice to have a feline presence with us today. So my model for moving through conflict, look at the 12 o'clock, okay, resolution. This is called the cycle of resolution. We know that conflict is going to happen there at about 1:30. Attitude of resolution or resolutionary thinking over there at 3 o'clock, the mindset we bring. Important to have people tell their stories from beginning to end, beginning to end. I remember a great story from the early years of mediation by a Canadian attorney who told the story about winning over $1 million in a summary judgment for his client, who was then disappointed. Why was the client disappointed? Because he never got to tell his story. People need to get up and out what's inside of them. All right. After people tell stories, you can have a preliminary vision of what might be a good positive result in the situation. By the way, just to regress for a moment, as a second-year law student working for Camden Legal Services, I was given 25 cases and told that that should keep me busy for the semester. 3 weeks later, I went back to the head of the program and I asked for more cases. And he asked me what I did with the ones that he gave me. And I said, well, I resolved them all. He said, well, how'd you do that? I said, well, I read through the files. I got a sense of what might be fair to everyone. I made some calls and everybody said yes. I didn't know I was supposed to be an advocate for one side, all right? And as I like to tell the story, I spent the next 10 years learning how to be a very effective advocate, and then decided that advocacy was not the best way of problem solving, all right? Preliminary vision, where might this go? Getting current and complete is when we drill down and I ask a series of questions that help surface the emotion in the conflict. It also has people discover more about what's possible in the situation. And then we get to an agreement in principle, big broad brush, so that people have some sense of the future and no longer sit in the fear of the ongoing conflict about what the future is going to look like. And then we create a detailed new agreement, the vision in action. And I like to say that the last step in any conflict resolution process is having a new agreement. And what I often do working with people is have them stand side by side looking in the future, as opposed to looking at each other, not in opposition, but looking out for a vision that they want to live in. If we were all emotionally mature, we could do that. All right. So the laws of agreement. Explicit and implicit agreements around us all over. We live in a sea of agreements. Most of us never learn, and good agreements can be a great source of productivity. They create a shared vision and a roadmap to the future. They improve chances for satisfaction. We get much better the more we practice creating agreements. When conflict and breakdown arises, it's an opportunity for creativity to create new agreements. So, what do we talk about at the beginning of a good collaboration? What goes into a good agreement at the end of a conflict resolution? What's our intent and vision? What do we want to see in the future? All right. What's it look like 6 months out, a year out, whatever time frame we're talking about? What role is each person going to play? What do they take responsibility for? What promises each person make? / what do they agree to do to bring that vision into a reality? What value that they perceive they're putting in and getting out? Why is it important for people to perceive that they're getting something out? Because their performance will stop if they don't see that. Metrics. A lot of disagreements happen because people have a different understanding of whether or not they achieved what they set out to do. So you need to have metrics that are objective. Concerns and fears. Often at the beginning of projects or at the end of a conflict resolution process, people have concerns and fears that they're not articulating. I think this is important to really raise at the front end so that people can respond to it. It's a great classic business story called the Abilene Paradox. Short version is people end up in a place they didn't want to be, and yet no one said, hey, this is not such a good idea on the front end. And that's why I say it's important to talk about concerns and fears on the front end. Renegotiation. We know what we know. We don't know what we don't know at the beginning. So it's important that we renegotiate as things go, as things are moving along in a project. Consequences / at stakeness. What's really at stake here? Why are we bothering to do this? What's important about this? For the individuals, for a team, for an organization, for a greater society? How will we resolve conflict? We know that conflict comes up. How are we gonna resolve it? And do we have an agreement? Is there trust? Are we on the same page? One of the things that drove me to create this alternative template for agreements were the form books that we all saw as practicing lawyers, or not everyone, but those people here who practice law at some point in time. And the form books always talked about what went wrong. I call those, I contrast those agreements for results versus agreements for fear, all right? A lot of the legal agreements don't focus much time and energy on what the real vision is that people are trying to accomplish, all right? So collaboration, conflict resolution, two sides to the same coin. So I'll ask everybody here to check their attitude about conflict. Do you like it or not, all right? And my suggestion is that you learn and make a choice to get good at conflict, that you learn to sit in situations of difficulty in conflict with, okay, I have a mind map, I understand this as a process, and all I need to do is kind of move through the process. What is the culture that you live in terms of agreements? The culture of your organization, the culture of your marriage, the culture of your team. It's an interesting phenomenon in my experience. When people have conflict, it's because of an incomplete or a non-existent agreement, and everybody's kind of floating around without some kind of a container or a template for what it is that they're doing together. So reflect on this for a moment. Think about a place in your life where there's disagreement, where there's conflict. And is there an agreement that's missing that needs to be put in place? By the way, I'm happy to share these slides with anyone who wants them after this presentation. All right. So some critical actionable ideas here. All right. Important to learn to value differences. It's where we get powerful collaborations and powerful results. Differences are a good thing. Develop emotional intelligence. All right. One of the I'm missing his name for a moment. The key guy who Daniel Goleman. Daniel Goleman is the guy that has made emotional intelligence something of a phenomenon. He's the guy who popularized it. Goleman. There's tons of his presentations on YouTube. You can find a lot of really good stuff. Allow emergence of third body. Third body is not one person, it's not another person, but it's what is between them. Often happens in love relationships or intimate relationships, but third body is kind of a critical level of emergence. Foster contribution of natural genius. Each one of us has a natural genius. It's, some of the capacities we were born with as human biological machines. And that's the place where you want to engage with others. That's the place that you want to foster their working together. Build bridges of shared vision and meaning through using agreements in a conscious way. Embrace resolutionary thinking, and be aware of the 3 V's, our nonverbal communication. When we communicate, we have verbal communication, we have voice communication, we have visual communication. The nonverbal is over 75% of our communication, so be aware of the intentionality of our nonverbal communication. So this is the cycle of resolution again. It's kind of reduced to one page. In some ways, I like to think of this as, the body of work that I will leave behind. It includes the additions of the attitude of resolution / resolutionary thinking, the elements of agreement, a little bit about getting current and complete, and the importance of resolution. Resolution or creating a shared vision at the beginning, of any collaboration is creating what I call a covenant, a meeting of both mind and heart. We all learned in law school, those of us who went, that an agreement was a meeting of the minds. And I say for a good collaboration, you need agreement of mind and agreement of heart. All right. So I'll leave you with kind of my contact information on this slide. If it's of interest to you, StewartLevine.com and ResolutionWorks@MSN.com. And now what I'd like to do is kind of open for discussion and discussion about anything I've said, discussion about any slide, discussion about anything else you'd like to talk about.
Stuart, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. Your maturity of judgment and the depth of thinking that goes into that is just extraordinary. Thank you so much. Let me ask you a couple of questions that came to my mind, and then we'll open it up to others. You talked about how you felt at one point in your own career that advocacy was not the right path for you. And yet, we as mediators or lawyers, those of us who are practicing law, are dealing all the time with people for whom advocacy is the right path. And some of those people go so far as to confuse belligerence with effective advocacy. I'm sure we've all seen negotiators and sometimes lawyers who fit that description. What do you recommend about dealing with people who are they're just compulsively advocates? They're argumentative. Don't confuse them with the facts. They've made up their mind. They just want more money for their client, or they want to pay less money for their client, or they on their own behalves in negotiations. What do you recommend as effective strategies for dealing with these very, very aggressive, shall we say, negotiators or participants?
It's great question, Jeff. Okay. So I'll use a dirty word, and it's something that I ascribe to. And there was a book written, I think that there was a book written a number of years ago called The No Asshole Rule. All right. And the bottom line is, if you see these folks coming, stay away. All right. don't engage. All right, if you have a choice, The second thing is realize who you're dealing with and adopt a strategy that pushes back. It's kind of like, I grew up in New York. And I will often say to people that I meet currently, half kiddingly, I may show up as very mild-mannered and very reasonable and very measured, but don't mess with me because Liz, a New York Jewish litigator. That's Brooklyn born. So you've got to fight a little fire with sometimes, and you've got to push back and show that you're not a pushover. And it doesn't mean that you have to be belligerent and remain belligerent. You might kind of, I like to think of it as the palm of your hand to somebody's forehead to just go, wake up, you cannot push me over, okay? Your belligerence is not going to work here. So those are a couple of thoughts that I have about how to deal with someone like that. You've got to push back and meet fire with fire if you have to deal with them. But it doesn't mean that you have to continue to do that, right? You've got to show them at some point in time that that behavior, one, is not something you're going to tolerate. And you bring to mind a story, Jeff. I was once doing my best to help a client resolve a situation with a partner. And I was acting as an advocate in that situation. And at the end of the session, the other guy fired his lawyer, and we went on to negotiate a settlement because the guy was acting like a jerk, just like the kind of person that you're talking about. So you got to hang in and eventually realize that things will end up well. Mm-hmm.
Stuart, is there any way to be more specific about it? What do you do to help yourself remain calm in a situation where somebody may be coming at you like a cannonball?
Beautiful. So this is where mindfulness practice comes in. All right, it's a term of art that is being used in so many situations today, and it's about practicing and being able to go to a place of center so that you don't get thrown off when you're pushed by that kind of belligerent behavior. I mean, we all have emotional reactions. I won't get into the brain science of it. We all have emotional reactions, but the short answer is have a happy place, have a visual place that you go to in your mind when you feel yourself kind of being moved into another direction. The fight and flight mechanism often comes in even though our life is not being threatened. It starts to, emerge. And so we need to talk our own selves back off the ledge. Self-talk is a critical strategy, all right? So as opposed to talking about, what this jerk is doing and what they're doing wrong, you need to start talking yourself down off the ledge and recognize, I will be much more capable. I will be much more resourceful if I can bring my own emotional level down. So those are a few suggestions, but mindfulness practice is real important. It's also important, I think, for anybody who's working in the world of mediation. People often ask when I'm teaching mediators, what's the most critical thing? And I say, the most critical thing is for you to do a lot of work on yourself so you can be totally present for the people who are in front of you.
Thank you, Stuart. Let me ask one more question, then I want to make sure other people have a turn. I'm thinking about a broad spectrum of different kind of conflict situations. And I'm asking myself, and I want to ask you if there are some where your approach is better suited than others. At one end of the spectrum, I'm thinking of perhaps marriage counseling or couples counseling. where people are presumably committed to a long-term relationship, ongoing relationship with each other. There's a deep love and respect between people. They're trying to overcome certain problems in the relationship. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have tort cases, what are sometimes in a pejorative almost sense called red car, blue car, right? Intersection collisions between people who've never seen each other before and probably will never see each other before. And they just need to figure out how much money gets paid for a release of the property damage and personal injury claims. So I can see where your approach would work very well, where interpersonal relationships are very intense and important parts of the situation. But what about all those other cases where we as mediators get involved, where it seems very transactional?
Yeah. So my own personal choice has been to stay away from those transactional cases. It's just not something that has grabbed me. I'm interested in helping people create longer term relationships. As a matter of fact, the majority of the work and my original training as a mediator was as a divorce mediator. As a matter of fact, this is just an aside story. I trained with a guy by the name of John Haynes in New York in the mid-1980s. And many people thought of John Haynes as the kind of the originator of modern divorce mediation practice. And he came out on the first day of this week-long training, and he said, rules are made for the guidance of wise people and the adherence of fools. And I always think about that as a great piece of wisdom, because after he said that, I said to myself, I think I just got my money's worth. Anyway, my work and the models that I shared today are for people who care about relationship, either relationship on the back end of a conflict or who want to create powerful collaborations as part of a good team. It's the direction that my life has taken. But for those other situations where it's a question of, red car, blue car, or how much money can I get out of this insurance company? It's a different world. It's a different kind of negotiation. To me, I think the most important thing about that is to realize that it's part of my work to learn the skills, tools, and techniques, and to just do the work without getting too emotionally involved. That's my take on that. And I learned about negotiating from a master. My senior partner, who I mentioned, said earlier, you can't unpunch someone, was a master at what I'd call the incremental negotiation. He would move in micro moves and would never negotiate against himself in those kinds of situations. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a wonderful crowd of almost 60 people here, Stuart, which is one of our larger crowds here on the Will Work for Food Project, New Possibilities Hour. I'm so glad everybody's here. And I'm sure that some people have questions. So if you'd like to post your question in the chat, we'll be happy to address it that way. If you'd simply like to unmute yourself and ask Stuart your question out loud, that's great too. Please. Anyone? Well, Stuart, let me ask you another question while we're waiting for the audience to formulate their questions, which is your preparation for a mediation or negotiation session. How do you typically prepare? I understand in terms of your own mindfulness exercises and clearing your mind, but what about familiarizing yourself with the people involved, familiarizing yourself with the situation they're facing? How do you prepare?
Sure. So I think that intake is probably one of the most important things, at least for me. All right. I will have a conference with each one of the parties And in that conference, I can learn a lot. And probably one of the most important things that I learn is whether or not these are people that I want to work with. I've gotten pretty good. Every once in a while, I make a mistake that comes back to bite me, but I get some sense of whether or not these folks are the kinds of folks that I want to work with. And at this point in time, I'm reasonably selective because I don't like to bang my head against the wall. I'm kind of too old at this point in time, and time for that. But that will give you a really good, I think, understanding of who these people are and whether or not these are people that you can work with that are going to be reasonable in terms of coming to some negotiated agreement. Okay. On the other side of that is, for me, the joy of helping people create good collaborations. I was recently called into a situation that I now became part of. It's an organization that some people I know and a lot of people that I don't know formed, called Society 2045, a vision for what the world might be in 20 some odd years. And they ran into some conflict. And so they called me and asked if I would help them move through the conflict that they were having, which I did. And we crafted kind of an agreement slash for everyone working on this program. And I then decided that, oh, this is something that I can have some fun with. And then I became part of this this organization. So yeah, front end, what's going on, and then, you know, how much detail do I need to know? How much information do I need to know beforehand in terms of, you know, what the history is, or is there documentation that's important? Just, you know, what are the critical pieces and mindsets of the people? And I think that that's a real important thing. What I also do, Jeff, is I try to do a little bit of education, and I'm sure that most everybody here does that, a little bit of education about the mindset that people need to bring if they want to have an effective result. If you're talking to someone, they want to resolve it. They are there to resolve it. They're not there to talk about it. They're there to get it resolved so that they can move on. So I try to educate people about mindset, and I try to get people to recognize that conflict is a temporary state, that it's something that they can let go of.
Thank you, Stuart. We have several questions coming in now. I'm going to take them perhaps not in the order which they're posted, but building on this, there's a question: how do you help people become more emotionally aware and better at self-regulation and self-motivation if needed? And particularly when there isn't an option of not negotiating with them.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume, Stuart, let's say you're working with a couple. Almost by definition, one person is going to be more mature than the other. One person is going to be more emotionally in tune than the other, just because you have two different people. And what do you do in terms of coaching or assisting the person who perhaps needs the assistance?
Yeah. So, one, at some point in time, you know, Jeff, there was a little controversy in the world of mediation about whether caucusing was a good thing. And then there was the Gary Friedman school of, you know, no, you never do any caucusing. And then there was the other end of the spectrum where caucusing is very useful. So I remember this from my early years of mediation, that the job of a good mediator is to empower someone who needs that kind of buoying. And at the same level, It's also sometimes you need to step into the coaching mode for someone who you see is not able to kind of manage themselves and doesn't have the skills in the context of the mediation. So you asked a number of questions. How do you manage yourself? I have been meditating, which is a form of self-mediation, since the early 1980s. All right. And I do that in a number of forms, including walking meditation, swimming meditation, and sometimes sitting meditation. And that's where you develop your own capacity to work with your own biological machine. Let me say something about that, all right? As a result of human birth, we all have a biological machine. It's a biochemical machine, and they're all different. You know, you go to a store and you buy an appliance or an automobile, it comes with a manual. Each one of us is a biological machine. We don't come with a manual. So through practice, mindfulness practice of various kinds, you understand how your machine and your mind operates so that you can have some level of understanding and, if you're lucky, a little bit of control over it. And what I try to do is, in some ways, model that behavior for the people we're working with and get them to start acting a little bit more mindful. So practice, practice, practice is kind of a critical way of being. And the ability to maintain that level of equanimity in a difficult situation is a critical skill. Not only in the context of mediation, but I said earlier when I opened the program that each one of the people here attending today is a bit of an island of sanity in a world that's pretty insane right now. If you know, we all read the newspapers, we all see what's going on nationally, internationally, legally, but in some ways, being that island of sanity, I think, is an important contribution that we can all make.
Is that, Stuart, part of the third body concept? We had a question asking you to explain the third body concept in a little more detail.
Sure. So think of it as, I think the best way to think about it is in the context of an intimate relationship or a powerful friendship. You know, why do we stay in those connections? We stay in those connections because between the individuals involved, there's something that's greater that emerges. 1 + 1 = more than 2. It's something that attracts us, engages us, gives us a level of joy, satisfaction, feels good. And that's what you want to try to allow to emerge in any form of collaboration.
Okay, Stuart, there's also a question about environmental and other similar collaborations and conflicts that will require long-standing solutions to address. Do you use these processes in those kinds of conflicts where it goes on for a long time and monitoring compliance and progress is important? Yeah, so it's interesting that the word environmental came up. I get attracted by shiny objects in terms of the projects and the things that I work on. And one of the things that I did was volunteer to be a teacher for Al Gore's climate science. After An Inconvenient Truth came out, I went to Nashville and was one of 1,000 people trained by Al Gore to share climate science. I'm sorry, Jeff, could you repeat the question? Yes, Stuart, how you apply the process in these long-term situations where monitoring and compliance are significant issues?
Beautiful. So in those kinds of situations, I will become a teacher, okay, and a mediator. I will try to facilitate agreement. Everything that I've taught today is a very condensed version of what can be a 2 or 3 day program. And I will start a program like that by teaching and training everyone so that they can operate from the perspective of being co-mediators, of being collaborators, of being able to work together over a long term, and getting people to buy into this way of operating and creating a charter for themselves about how they will operate long term, right? Unfortunately, more folks don't operate and choose not to operate in this way, and they still see the world as kind of a game of conflict and the game of how much can we get away with. But if I would wave my magic wand, I would have everyone in the world working in this way.
So then, Stuart, since we have 2 minutes left, let me ask you a simple question. How does the concept of neutrality enter into all this? You say, for example, you're trained by Al Gore. He's associated with one particular perspective on the issues that you addressed. You talked about an orientation toward getting an agreement when sometimes, for some participants, not coming to an agreement might actually be in their best interests. So how does the traditional concepts of mediator neutrality play in to your approach?
Yeah, so it all depends upon the role you're playing, Jeff, I think, and the role that people have asked you to play. I also remember this great statement that being neutral does not equal being neutered. In other words, you don't have to be kind of a silent participant, but in certain situations, you can advocate for a certain perspective and share a certain viewpoint, often to help people come to some level of agreement. That being said, the neutrality is also about becoming curious about how people develop the perspective that they had and not being judgmental around them. A dear friend and colleague of mine, Marilee Adams, has written a book called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. And in it, she has what's called the learning map. And when people are in situations of conflict, they often become judgers or learners. Judgers gets you nowhere. It gets you in argument. It gets you in opposition. If you're curious and start to adopt a learning mindset, which is what I said about resolutionary thinking, teaching and learning, you can have a much greater understanding of where people are coming from.
Fantastic. That's a wonderful note on which to end our conversation, Stuart. On behalf of the Will Work for Food Project, Natalie, Jean, Sarah, and myself, I want to thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I know that many people who are in a position to contribute to help fight food insecurity are going to do so in your honor. If they're able to contribute to the Alameda Food Bank, that's www.alamedafoodbank.org, www.alamedafoodbank.org, and that's up in the East Bay of Northern California, where you live, Stuart, and where I've spent some very wonderful years as well. I hope people are able to do that, or a food bank of their choice, or one that's important to them in their own community. With that, we say thank you. It's been a wonderful hour. I think, Stuart, you will become the answer to that incredible trivia question that'll last through the ages. Who was the speaker who put the Will Work for Food project above the $300,000 mark. Thank you so much. With that, we are complete.